Hey guys, it's Kelly with St. Johns County Parks and Recreation. I am here to give you another talk I would have customarily given at our libraries, but I'm bringing to you virtually today. And today we're going to talk about dune ecology, right? We all love going to the beaches. We see our beautiful dune systems, but I really want to talk to you about how they formed, why they're so important, and some key species that you will find there. First and foremost, how was Florida formed? This is a really important question to ask because this kind of gives glimpses into why things are the way they are today. So I'm going to take you back to 12,000 to 2.6 million years ago to the Pleistocene epoch. So we are currently in the Holocene epoch, the time of man, but I want to bring you back to right before then. And we had four very significant glacial events in North America during this time frame. And we saw very different ranges in our sea levels. So during glacial events, we saw almost 300 feet of sea level decline. And so basically our state was like twice the size that it is right now. So if you look at this visual here, you can see that dotted line. That would have been what was the landmass of Florida. If you're also familiar with where the continental shelf is, that is right along the same lines as that dotted line. In addition, we also saw extreme warmth and sea level rise. So we saw 150 feet of sea level rise above what we currently see today. And what was left was all that's in kind of the gray there. So you can see Florida was really just a chain of islands, and the rest of Florida would have been very shallow coral reefs. And so this chain of islands formed what we have today as a lot of endemic species like the scrub jay. So the scrub jay were originally part of the entire continental United States. And then during this period when the waters rose and the scrub jays couldn't connect with those other populations, they basically evolved into their own species. We see this with a lot of other species that are found particularly along the Lake Wales Ridge and our scrub habitats. But this really shallow area, when most of Florida was underwater, like I said, was coral reefs. And these coral reefs over time, through these glacial events, through these millions of years of pressure, formed the limestone rock base in which we all pretty much live on today. So we do have a bed of limestone under most of us here in the state of Florida, and that's due to a lot of those ancient coral reef systems. Now I want to talk about as well a little secret, guys, sand moves. So we have lots of barrier islands here and throughout the state of Florida. Notably here locally, we have Anastasia Island. And so I like to point this out to people because our dunes are formed over a very long period of time. But during that period of time, things are shifting and moving, and especially on barrier islands, there are almost no constants. Mother Nature is constantly putting new inlets in, filling in other areas, creating an area of accretion and erosion. And so it's really important to understand these dynamics and that sand moves because it says a lot about some of the structures that we put in place, like lighthouses. So today, if you were out navigating the ocean and you were trying to make it to the inlet and you followed the lighthouse in, you actually wouldn't make it to the inlet because it no longer marks our inlet spot. And I'm going to demonstrate this through a series of aerials and maps that show you how the north end of Anastasia Island has moved over time. Now, I got this from the St. Augustine Lighthouse website. I don't think it's a resource that's currently still on there. They redid their whole website, but I want you to follow along with these pictures here. So back in 1741, you can see the landmass is in that kind of taupe color, while today's existing boundaries for the north end of Anastasia Island are in the dotted line. So you can see in 1741, which was almost 300 years ago, it looked very different. And then we can go ahead to 1766, 1809, right? And this is a totally weird landmass. You have this little pocket of area kind of just south of the north end of the island. And you can see those dotted lines. It's very different to what we see today. In 1874, the lighthouse of the current lighthouse became under construction, and so that noted the existing inlet at the time. 1887, 1940. So there's something really important in this map that I really want to point out that dictates what we currently see today. So in 1940, the Army Corps of Engineers decides they're going to dredge a new inlet to St. Augustine. This is an inlet that they're going to continue to maintain and dredge for waterway traffic. So basically, in 1940, they made the decision that they are going to human alter this environment. And so you can see where the new inlet is and what we know as the inlet today. But that whole northern stretch that we basically know as Anastasia State Park now is really not even formed yet in 1940. And then today you can see where we are. And if you were, like I said, if you were to follow that lighthouse in, you wouldn't actually reach the inlet. And we now today have Salt Run, we have Anastasia State Park, and that's all because sand moves in these barrier islands. And so hopefully this was a good visual for you to see that even from 1940 to today, so in my grandfather's lifetime, this northern end of Anastasia Island has drastically changed, and it will continue to change in my lifetime. Now, in addition to really long-term changes that we see on our islands and in our dune and barrier systems, we also see a lot of seasonal changes. So in the summertime, we tend to have very somewhat steep beaches. We get this extra berm. So let me explain to you what happens here. We have sand that moves onto shore and just offshore into a shallow reserve all throughout the year. So in the summertime, that shallow sandbar has been moved up onto the beach and it hangs out there. And then in the wintertime, that sand is basically recaptured by the ocean and gets moved out to that shallow sandbar. I want you guys to think of this almost as your bank account, right? Like your bank account, money's always coming and going, but more or less you try to maintain a consistent amount of money in your bank account. Now, behind that beach section, you have the dunes, and that's really what we're going to talk about today. And that dune system is incredibly important because that dune system acts like your 401k or your savings account. It takes a lot longer to build up, a lot longer to develop, and once you start taking from it, it's a lot harder to replenish it. So this seasonal movement in sand, not a problem. It's pretty much washes each other out. But once you start to lose that dune, that's when things can become critical. You'll also notice in the winter we lose a lot of our beaches due to things like nor'easters that we had last week. And cumulatively, we seasonally lose really more beaches to our nor'easters than we tend to do during hurricane season. So where did the sand on our beaches come from? Where did it originate from? Well, it depends on where you are. So we have two types of sand here in St. Johns County. We have coquina sand and quartz sand. So this coquina sand is indicative of pretty much Volcano north up to Ponte Vedra. This is really good sand to find shark's teeth in. And this is because this type of sand has been pushed in from the currents and from the tides from areas that have very rich shell and organic deposits. So shells are basically past animals. Animals make shells that wash up on the beach. And so these shells get broken up and washed around and tossed around in the ocean, and then they get pushed up onto the sand. So our northern beaches tend to be a lot more of that coquina sand. Now in our southern beaches, so I'm referring to mainly Anastasia Island, we have what we call sugar sand or quartz sand. That quartz sand is really fine white sand that we think, or we don't think, we know comes from the Appalachian Mountains. And so this has happened over thousands of years and potentially even millions of years. This sand from the Appalachian Mountains has eroded, and parts of the mountain have eroded, and they go into creeks and they go into rivers, and the river leads to the ocean. And that sand then travels, and it has made its way here. So if you actually trace back the origins of our quartz sand, it will lead you to the Appalachian Mountains. where does the sand get the nutrients from? This is all coming together to a culmination of our dune system here, guys. And so we know we couldn't go to the beach and try to grow like vegetables. We would fail. This is not a very nutrient rich. We don't do a lot of agriculture on our beaches because not a lot of things grow there. There's not a lot of nutrients in that type of soil, right? You'd never take a bunch of sand home to try to plant something in. You'd probably be very unsuccessful. So there are only really two main sources of nutrients for our dune systems. First and foremost, and definitely the most important, are the rack lines. So in the wintertime, now that we're kind of coming into nor'easter season and we're getting some stronger offshore winds that push things on up, if you visit the beach, you will notice something similar to this picture, or you will notice a bunch of seaweed on the beach. All of these rack lines are super important, not only for all of the life that they help to sustain because they have lots of critters in there that the birds like to eat, but these rack lines decompose, and especially the storm rack lines that sit right at the base of those dune systems, that will all decompose and provide nutrients for new dune plants to establish. In addition, sea turtle nests, the eggs that haven't hatched, the broken eggs, they're all buried in the sand and they will also decompose and provide nutrients. And we know that our sea turtle nests are often right on the edge of that dune line. They provide really necessary nutrients for those new species that are coming in to kind of replenish that front end of the dunes to grow. So let's get into our dune plants. There's a couple really key specific plants that we see in our dune system that will tell you you are at the beach, you are seeing dunes. So this vegetation that I'm going to talk about is so incredibly important because this vegetation is the glue that holds all of this sand together. This vegetation is what helps to fend off storm damage. Damage would be much worse if we did not have a lot of vegetation, especially on our southern beaches, our crescent beaches, those areas where we have 1, 2, 3 layers of dunes. This dune vegetation is super important to make sure that the storm events only really impact the front part of those dunes. So vegetation is the foundation of everything that lives in the dunes, right? But if you don't have plants, you don't have stabilization. So if you take a look at this picture here, this is an image that was following Hurricane Matthew, and you can see in this image how long and how extensive those root systems are of those plants. And I guarantee you, if those plants weren't there, if it was just a pile of sand, there would have been even more damage. We would have lost even more of our dunes. So they're very, very important, not only because they sustain the entire ecosystem of the dune as far as what lives there, but also because they're a huge form of protection for us in our coastal areas. So if you're going to be a plant that's going to live in our dune system, you're going to have to be drought tolerant. We get a lot of rain there, but you have to imagine that the rain goes very quickly through the sand. It doesn't sit there, and it will drain very, very fast. And we go through dry spells where we don't get a lot of rain. You have to be able to tolerate that. Definitely have to be salt tolerant. There are a lot of plants that cannot handle the salt, so they cannot live in our dunes. They have really large root systems, right? And that's their key thing that we need for protection. They don't need a lot of nutrients. So we told you those two main sources their nutrients come from. So if they need really anything more than that, I can't live there. They often experience a lot of high winds, makes them susceptible to what we call salt pruning, especially some of our tree species. They have to be okay with being covered in sand. So when that wind blows, it a lot of times takes sand with it, and it can cover species of plants. And so you have to be able to rebound really fast. Which brings me to my last point, that these plants have to be able to recover after events like hurricanes and storms. So we have a myriad of species that we can find in our dune systems. First and foremost, and by far most important, is sea oats. So sea oat species are protected by the state of Florida, so they can't be collected or transplanted unless you have authorization and approval. And they're One of the most important plants of the dunes, I really can't stress this enough. They are a key plant in stabilizing our dune system. So a lot of those roots that you saw in that previous picture were likely sea oat roots. They have very extensive root systems. And then those seed pods at the very top that you can see in this picture here are an awesome food source for a lot of things that live in the dunes, most notably a cute little mouse species we have here locally that I'll talk about in a few minutes. And this is the go-to plant if you're going to do a dune restoration. Any of those projects that you have seen lately of restoration work or projects that are coming, 9 times out of 10, or really like 99.9% of the time, if they're revegetating a dune, they're going to put sea oats in. It's the best plant. It does the best. It grows the best. It provides the best root system. That's the plant you want in your dunes if you're doing a restoration. The next one's one of my favorites. I love this plant so much. The prickly pear cactus, it gets this beautiful yellow flower, and it provides food for lots of animals, most notably the gopher tortoises. I love gopher tortoises. If you haven't had a chance to check out me and my gopher tortoise friend Augie, check out more videos on our Facebook page where Augie and I get to do some cool things and educate you on awesome turtley things. This is super easy to grow. So if you have a black thumb and you can't grow anything, I recommend a cactus because you literally just have to put it in a pot and that's it. That's how you grow it. It requires almost no care. Just don't drown it. Don't water it too much. That's the only pretty much way you can kill it. And you actually can eat it. So not only is our tortoise friends enjoying prickly pear cactus snacks, but you can actually cook prickly pear cactus. Blanket flower, also one of my favorites. This is very seasonal, but it will get beautiful red, orange, yellow flowers that almost look like they were tie-dyed. This attracts lots of pollinators, and they pretty much reseed themselves, so they'll die back in the wintertime, but they will reseed, drop new seeds, and then in the summertime, you will have all new beautiful Indian blanket flowers. Railroad vine. This is one of our pioneer species. This is one of those ones you kind of see on the edges of dunes. It gets its name because it runs in almost exactly straight lines. It's this beautiful purple flower, which is also known as beach morning glory. And these guys also, in conjunction with the sea oats, are used a lot in restoration projects. The idea here is that these guys like to take over new areas and they grow very quickly. And so this is a pioneer species. This species kind of comes in and establishes everything. And then long term, you want species like sea oats to kind of come in and, finish the job. So the railroad vine kind of takes off, kind of starts the job, and then the sea oats are a little bit slower to really get fully established, but it allows them the time to still have some kind of stabilization here. So the coupling of those two is a pretty successful pair. Your cabbage palm, also known as sable palm, super funny story. So the state tree of Florida is the cabbage palm, except scientifically speaking, it's not actually a tree. It's actually classified as a grass. So go Florida. We have a state tree that's a grass. This is really found further back in the dunes. You're not going to see this in the forefront of the dunes, but it does have that edible heart in the middle. So if you've ever had swamp cabbage, it is the edible part at the very middle at the top of that palm tree. And this provides vertical structure to the dunes. So while the previous plants we've talked about are kind of along the ground and along the bottom, this provides a nice tall thing in a totally different habitat. So if you have palm trees in your yard or you're familiar with the palm trees at the beach, you'll notice what they have on them are boots. That's what it's called once the frond falls off, but like that spiky thing that goes all the way up the tree. And those boots are like apartment complexes for our natural areas. There are tons of things that live in there. Every single boot pretty much will have something living in it and enjoying it. Something to note, if you do have a palm tree, please don't give it the hurricane cut where you only leave it with like 3 palm fronds. It really wants to have a big bushy top on the top of it, and it will actually help it better survive a storm. So for the health of your palm trees, you really should only be trimming those fronds that are totally brown. So if you were to look at a dune cross section of how a dune is made up and kind of where you would find some of these plants, You have your beach where really you don't have a lot growing. Then you have your foredune, which is a smaller dune in front of your primary dune. This is where you have your pioneer species. This is where you have those species that are coming in and growing very quickly and trying to spread and expand that dune system like your railroad vine. Then you have your primary dunes, and your primary dunes are a lot of your grasses and your shrubs. They're things that have been there a little bit longer and they have an extensive root system. Typically in the storm events, you lose your foredune first and then your primary dune. And hopefully, if you're lucky and you have a really successful dune system like we have at the GTM Research Reserve or down in the Crescent Beach area or Anastasia Island, you've got the secondary or tertiary dunes. These are really old dunes that have been around for a very long time. And they've started the process of what we call succession. So they've gone from your quick growing pioneer species to your established grasses and shrubs. And now we're getting that vertical growth. We're getting the palm trees. We're getting the salt pruned live oaks. And so we're starting to get those species that have a little more canopy. They're a little bit older. They've been there for a while. And ideally, when you have storm events, you don't get back to that secondary and tertiary dunes, that the front dunes do their job and they handle the weather systems well. And if you're really lucky, you continue to grow your dunes. So hopefully one day your foredune becomes your primary dune and you have a foredune in front of that. And then everything else behind it is another layer of protection. Now we do have some invasive plants in our dunes that we don't want to see. So I have a couple I'm going to point out to you, and if you have them, you should go ahead and get rid of them so you're not contributing to the invasive plant problems on such an important ecosystem that we have here locally. First and foremost is one of my arch nemesis. This is Brazilian pepper. It's getting towards the time of year where a lot of other things start to die back, and this thing is still vibrant green and will have these beautiful red berries on it. This is a multi-stem tree that's actually a noxious weed that's claimed over 700,000 acres of Florida's landscape. Not good. It's spread by animals who eat the seeds and go ahead and poop them out the other end, nice and fertilized for everybody. Now, if you are going to remove it or work with it, please note that it is in the same family as poison ivy. I have severe reactions to poison ivy and have worked with Brazilian pepper for a long time, and I've never had a bad reaction. That doesn't mean you won't. So please take precautions, long sleeves, gloves, have your skin all covered. I know I do that when I work with Brazilian pepper, and that's probably why I haven't had reactions, because I take the precaution to stay covered to prevent the risk of being exposed to that sap. You do have Brazilian pepper, you do have to cut it down and go ahead and treat it. It is a crazy resilient plant. So unlike most trees, if you were to cut them at the base, right, they would die. They would really struggle to grow back. Not this tree. If you cut it at the base, you actually have about a 5 to 10 minute window to apply herbicide before that tree heals itself over and whatever you spray isn't going to be effective. And then it will just start to regrow from the trunk. If you're going to replace your Brazilian pepper, I suggest some of these beautiful natives like a yaupon holly, a Simpson stopper, or an East Palaca holly. The next plant that we see, unfortunately, in our dune systems are asparagus fern. Fun fact for you, it's not actually a fern, it's in the lily family. It's very common in landscaping and in hanging plants. We see it all the time sold in hanging variation, except the problem is it gets these beautiful red berries on it that the birds love, and they will take it to our natural areas, once again, send it out the other end, fertilized, and then we have it in places we really don't want it. This really doesn't have a great root system. It pretty much has all of these fern-like things that come off of one yam that's underneath the ground. And so there's really not a lot of roots there. And we want roots in our dune system. Roots are what hold our dunes together. And so if you're going to remove asparagus fern, you want to replace it with maybe something that has a similar texture or shape. So soaked aster is a great option if you're looking for something that kind of has that fluffy feel to it. Coontie fern is an amazing native option. Know that it will grow very slowly though. And then you also have dwarf yaupon hollies that can kind of provide that kind of circular shrub if you're looking for something similar. Last but certainly not least is my least favorite plant that probably has ever grown on the face of the earth. Mother of millions, as the name implies, it produces a lot of babies. So this plant is really beautiful. You can see they also call it the chandelier plant because it has all these downward pointed red beautiful flowers when it flowers in the wintertime. And this plant, the problem is that each of these leaves grows little itty bitty baby plants. And it drops those plantlets down. It produces more and more plantlets, and those little plantlets are viable. They're like this big, and they fall into the sand, and then they start to grow. So that mother of millions really isn't an exaggeration because this plant can produce a ridiculous amount of plantlets, and they're just constantly, basically continuing to fill the area with more plants. There are entire areas where we have what we call carpets of this plant, where there's almost nothing growing except it. And this plant is very, very bad for our dune system for two really key reasons. One, it's toxic to our wildlife. So our animals like our gopher tortoises that love to eat succulents like prickly pear cactus can't eat this. It's toxic to them. We have no evidence that they're trying to eat it. So it's not helpful or beneficial or providing anything for our wildlife. The biggest problem with this plant, though, is it has an incredibly shallow root system. I'm talking 1 to maybe 3 inches. It's incredibly easy to pull out of the ground. Very, very short roots. And you pull them out super easy. That is not the kind of plant we want in our dune system. And this plant grows very quickly and will take over those disturbed areas when we have storm events. And so it will move in, it will allow none of the other native vegetation to grow. And so now we have this whole patch area that was bare sand and could have been replenished with nice native vegetation that had a good root structure. And instead, all we have is a bunch of this mother of millions or Cody, and that root system is not going to do anything to hold our dunes together. I know that there are some of you who have joined me for volunteer days to remove this from our beaches because it's very easy to remove, like I said, for hand pulling. So I encourage you to look for future work days to come out there and join me and get rid of this terrible invasive plant. If you have it on your property and you're trying to replace it, anything in the agave family is incredibly easy to grow, right? Because that's why you grow this plant, because it's super easy. If you've got a black thumb, it grows really easy. In fact, we had a group that pulled a Cowee, put it in black contractor bag, put it in a closet, months later came back to the closet with no light and no water, and it was growing out of the bag. That's how easy it is to grow. That's why people like it. So if you're looking something with that level of ease, century plant, Spanish bayonet, prickly pear cactus, or if you're looking for something that still has a pretty flower, that has the ability to kind of cover the ground, I highly, highly recommend dune daisies. Dune daisies are amazing at growing quickly with very minimal help. Also known as beach sunflower. All right, dune animals is my favorite animal. This is a super cute tortoise butt. So let's just start with the tortoise. So tortoises are adorable, and this tortoise in particular, his name is Augie. Augie is a non-releasable educational gopher tortoise that we utilize in a lot of our education programming to teach people about how awesome these animals are. This is a land turtle. They have feet like an elephant to walk around on land. Very good at digging. They dig these extensive burrows that can be 5 to 10 to 15 feet deep and up to 40 feet long. Typically, though, they're only about 10 feet long. These guys, it's very common for them to go to the beach. So while they live in the dunes, these guys sometimes get ticks, especially on their necks. And so in order to get rid of those ticks, they think that sitting in that salt water helps. So you will oftentimes see these gopher tortoises, and they are on a mission to get to the beach and soak in the water. So they will sit right there where the water meets the sand and let the waves wash over them in order to get those ticks off. And when they're done, they just slowly walk on back to their home in the dunes. So these guys know what they're doing. If you see them on the beach, let them do their tortoise thing. They're not lost, and they definitely don't need to be rescued. So don't put them further into the water. They are not a sea turtle. They cannot swim, but they will just sit right there and let the water wash over them. These guys, what's really critically important about them is the burrows that they dig. They have these really extensive burrows that go underground, and over 350 different species have been documented utilizing these burrows. Your snakes, your rabbits, your frogs, your lizards, your mice, your insects, like so many species. And without the gopher tortoises digging those burrows, those species then don't have places to utilize for their homes, to hide from predators, to hide from wildfires in our upland areas where these guys are found, these gopher tortoise burrows. Basically, everyone will be in the burrow and they all basically call a truce. Like the snake will be next to the mouse and they're like, it's okay, it's a fire, we're calling a truce. But as soon as we get back out there, um, these guys are considered a state threatened species and they are protected. So you do have to have special permits to have one, like we have for Augie. You cannot feed them, you cannot touch them, you cannot harvest them. They are protected because of that role as a keystone species. And they like to eat lots and lots of grass and flowers and all of the pretty plants that grow on the dunes. The next one I want to talk about are green sea turtles, and I'm specifically going to talk about green sea turtles because they are the ones that tend to nest furthest up into our dune systems. So while we have other species of sea turtles that nest here on our beaches, the green sea turtle really tends to nest right on the edge or right just inside the edge of our dunes. Fun fact for you, green sea turtles are not called green necessarily because of the color of their shell. They're actually called green sea turtles because if you were to look at the color of green sea turtle body fat, it would actually be green. And so just like a flamingo eats a lot of shrimp until they turn pink, or we eat a lot of carrots or sweet potatoes and we turn orange, it's a thing. I have baby pictures to prove it. Thanks, Mom. Um, these guys eat so much seaweed. They eat so much ocean salad that they actually turn green. They're the second most common nester that we have here in St. Johns County, and they tend to arrive later in the nesting season. So sea turtle nesting season runs from May 1st to October 31st, and we tend to not see these guys till closer to June and July. They like the water to be warm, they like the temperature to be warm if they're gonna come on in. Okay, the next one's super cute, and we're super lucky because remember when I was talking about species that are only found here in the state of Florida, like the scrub jay, and I used that word endemic? Well, we have a beach mouse here that is endemic to only Anastasia Island. So just this one island that we have here in St. Johns County. It's a cute, incredibly tiny little mouse that is actually federally endangered. And these guys dig burrows. They have these cutest little burrows in our dune system, and they're nocturnal. So it's very, very, very rare to see them. We don't get a lot of sightings of them because a lot of people don't spend a lot of time at the beach at night or very early in the morning. In fact, on our Parks and Recreation staff, the people who see them the most are actually the guys who go out and do trash runs, or anybody who's on the beach really, really early in the day. And sometimes they get caught in the trash cans and the trash guys kind of let them go and set them free. But these guys are really important in their role of spreading dune vegetation. So you see this picture here of Gus from Cinderella. I'm a huge Disney fan. And I encourage you to go back and watch the movie if you don't know the scene I'm referring to. But there's a scene where Gus goes out, right? And there's all of these corn kernels out there. And so Gus decides he's going to try to get as many corn kernels as possible. So he loads them all up, stacks them all up, and he tries to run back into the hole because the cat is coming. Well, the corn kernels go flying everywhere. And that's kind of the same thing, minus the cat, that the Anastasia Beach Mice do. They go out and they collect sea oat seeds instead of corn kernels. They try to collect as many as they can, and then they try to bring them all home to their burrow. And along the way, they basically can't hold on to all of them. And so they just lose all of these sea oats throughout the dunes. Sometimes they forget where they left them, they leave them down in their burrows, and so they help to disperse the sea oat seeds throughout our dune system. These guys are super incredibly cute and adorable, and there's lots of studies going on to better understand our population dynamics here on Anastasia Island. Another one that you'll see often are our marsh rabbits. These guys are small with a gray-brown tail, and they're most active at dusk and dawn. They're incredibly common in our dune systems. And a lot of times, if you actually look in the dunes, you'll see a lot of these animal trails or trails that were created by animals. And once you start to look for them, you'll start to see them. And a lot of times it's your marsh rabbits and your gopher tortoises that are really creating these trails. These guys too are herbivores. You can also find lots of marsh rabbit scat, all these like teeny tiny little cocoa puffs that are in a pile. They're from your marsh rabbit friends. Eastern diamondback rattlesnake, guys, this is one of the coolest animals ever. I have only ever encountered 2 of these in the wild, and they're still 2 of the coolest wildlife encounters I've ever had. I'm a little biased. I love snakes. I have my snake earrings on today. But these guys are awesome. They're 3 to 6 feet. They're Florida's largest venomous snake, and they really like to utilize gopher tortoise burrows. Now, like the name implies, they do rattle. They have this rattle on the end, but something interesting is happening to our rattlesnake species. So, unfortunately, they have a very bad rap, and they are targeted a lot by people. And what's happening is evolution, basically, where these snake species, these rattlesnakes, are starting to develop populations that don't rattle. So if you're in an area where a lot of rattlesnakes rattle, and then because they rattle, because they're warning people, those are the snakes that get killed, right? But if the snake lies in wait and you don't see it, it's less likely to get killed. So those snakes that aren't rattling are now the ones that are going on to reproduce, while those snakes that do rattle and do warn you are not getting the opportunity to reproduce. And so over time, we start to see a decline in rattlesnake individuals that actually rattle. This isn't a good thing. I don't know about you, but I want to know if a rattlesnake friend is nearby. I think it's really cool. But one of my chance encounters with a rattlesnake, I almost stepped on one because it didn't rattle, like at all, until it got very mad. And so that was not a good thing. So we want to make sure that we have a healthy respect for these animals and understand that we want to respect them and not fear them. There's really no need to kill a rattlesnake. It is out there doing its rattlesnake thing, and that needs to be respected, especially on our dune systems, because they are such critical ecosystems that these snakes are a part of. They do like to live in high and dry places, so you're not really going to find them where it's wet. And if it has rained a lot, you'll see them kind of move out of the flooded areas to places that are high and dry. Once again, we want to respect our rattlesnake friends. We do not want to kill them or take the shovel to them. Let them be, give them their space, and they're amazing, amazing parts of our ecosystem. Now, we do have some invasive animals in our dunes. Cats. I know some of you might be cat people, but they're one of the most destructive animals in our natural area. They're born killers. And so we have over 50 million feral cats in the United States, and every single year in the US, they kill 1 to almost 4 billion birds with a B, over potentially 20 million small mammals. They kill over 250 million reptiles and over 100 million amphibians. Cats don't belong in a delicate system like our dunes. Our dunes have really special species that you can't find other places. They have a very delicate balance of their ecosystem. It's a very fragile and important ecosystem that we don't want cats to mess with. So other ecosystems can handle feral cats better. Our dunes cannot. They'll pretty much wipe out your beach mice, they'll wipe out your gopher tortoise eggs, they'll wipe out a lot of your bird species. So we really don't want to see feral cats in our dune system. Side note, feral cats are responsible for entire species of birds going on extinct in certain islands. So they're directly responsible for the extinction of a handful of species of animals from the face of the earth. Another much lesser known invasive species is this really weird animal called the cactus moth. So we have those native prickly pear cactuses, What happens is that this cactus moth will come and lay an egg stick on the pad of the cactus. So you can see that bottom picture there where it kind of is really curly and not straight like you would expect a cactus spine to be. So that's an egg stick of a cactus moth. So I actually do surveys on a select group of our prickly pear cactus that I look over for these cactus moth sticks before they turn into what the picture you see on the right is. So those eggs hatch and they basically go into the pad of the cactus and they eat the pad of the cactus from the inside out. And I actually took that picture on the right. It was super creepy, but really cool at the same time. So look at all those little cactus moth caterpillars, I guess, that are all in that cactus pad. Not good, not something we want on our native vegetation. And they're pretty much solely responsible for a big part of a declining cactus populations in certain parts of Florida where it has infested our cactus population. So this is an interesting one. Like I said, we do cactus moth surveys, as well as other managers of our coastal areas. Like I know down at Fort Matanzas, they have a manager there, and he goes through and he looks for cactus moth to ensure that they don't have any on their property. They want to ensure the health of their cactus population. So what can you do to help protect this incredibly special ecosystem that we really treasure here in Florida? First and foremost, stay off the dunes. They are a very fragile and protected system, and you don't want to get a ticket for being in the dunes if you're not supposed to be. Follow the leash laws. Dogs can be very destructive to our dune systems and natural areas in general. Keep the beach and our dunes clean. So we just had International Coastal Cleanup not too long ago, and we will have other cleanup opportunities moving forward if you follow the St. Johns County Parks and Recreation events. Participate in dune restorations if you're given the opportunity. Remove invasive species from your yard so they don't become issues in our conservation areas. You can volunteer for washback season. So we are entering into washback season, that time of year when we get onshore winds that blow seaweed in with our little baby turtles. And so if you're interested in that, you can check out our county website to become a volunteer for our washback season to help basically go out and not only clean up our beaches, but look for these little baby turtles and respond to having these little baby turtles wash in. And keep your cats indoors, like I said, and hopefully stressed, especially if you live in our coastal areas. We do not want cats on our dune system. They can be incredibly destructive. Well, this is the part of the presentation where I would ask for questions if we were in person, but since we're not in person, you can go ahead and put them below and I will try to get answers to you. But thank you guys so much for joining me today and taking time out of your day to learn about our precious dune system. I hope very soon I can be giving these presentations in person again. But until then, please enjoy the rest of these videos. It was great connecting with you guys. Till next time.